For more on this, let's now cross live to University of Tehran Professor Mohammad Marandi. Mr. Marandi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Iran's top diplomat has announced that the Strait of Hormuz is now open for all commercial vessels, at least as long as the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon holds. Meanwhile, Donald Trump says Washington's naval blockade will remain in place. What do you make of these somewhat contradictory statements?
Well, everything that Trump says is contradictory. And usually what he says is not very truthful. And often what he says is complete fake news. So one shouldn't take anything that he says seriously. Right now he says that the Israelis have been ordered not to bomb Lebanon again. Tomorrow he may say, wipe out the entire Lebanese population. Who knows? What is important for Iran are the facts on the ground, and that the ceasefire agreement, which was agreed upon 10 days ago between Iran and the United States, that is fulfilled. The United States and Netanyahu refused to implement the deal when Netanyahu launched his barbaric strikes against Beirut and Lebanon. And as a result, we're not pass through the Strait of Hormuz. And for the last 10 days, Iran has refrained from doing so until Netanyahu stops the slaughter. That pressure gradually increased because we are reaching a critical point in the global economy, and U.S. pressure on Netanyahu increased. The night before, there was supposed to be a ceasefire. Netanyahu still refrained. Iran added a new threat by saying they'll strike the Israeli regime. And so the combination of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian threat led this Israeli regime to accept the ceasefire. So now that the ceasefire has been accepted, Iran is carrying out its obligation, and that is to increase the number of ships that pass through the Strait of Hormuz.
Now, Trump says Tehran agreed to hand over all of its highly enriched uranium to Washington, and the U.S. will not pay Iran for it. So what do you think about this statement?
There has been no nuclear agreement between Iran and the United States as we speak. And in fact, the belief in Iran is that actually the United States may be preparing itself for a war against Iran. So Iran has been preparing itself 24 hours a day. And if the United States launches another war, it will probably include a land offensive. So Iran is preparing for that as well. And Iran is determined to make sure that the United States loses that war. And if there is a war, they will have propaganda and Western media will say how successful they are. But after a few days, we'll see that the United States will be in a quagmire. Just like the 12-day war and the recent Ramadan war, the 40-day war, on both occasions, the Western media, even those opponents who opposed Trump, were talking about how great successful they were, and it turned out to be, on both occasions, the exact opposite. So Iran is actually preparing itself for escalation. But if that escalation does happen, then I think the remaining assets in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed. And then the global economic depression will definitely be upon us. But as things stand, we'll have to see. If the United States moves in a different direction, then we can move in a different direction. But it's too early to say. Iran has only agreed right now to implement what was agreed upon 10 days ago, but which Netanyahu prevented from being implemented. If it wasn't for Netanyahu, the last 10 days, we could have had many ships traveling to ease the global economic crisis, but Netanyahu wouldn't have that.
And while all this is going on, we've seen that oil prices have dropped after Iran's announcement about opening the strait. So what do you think lies ahead for global oil markets? Oil futures seem to indicate that tensions will subside, or perhaps not.
No one knows, because the number of ships that will be passing through the Strait of Hormuz will be very limited, and they will not be enough to meet demand. So, manipulation and psychology aside, the situation will continue to get worse, but perhaps at a more slow pace. Ultimately, the only way for the situation to normalize would be for the Americans to withdraw their troops and for the Israeli regime to stop provoking and encouraging war. But as things stand, these are just momentarily shifts and manipulations, and people are making a lot of money. But probably the price of oil will not go down, and the crisis will get worse with or without war. Again, unless Trump makes a radical decision to change his policy and to end this this confrontation and to prevent the Israeli regime from continuing its genocidal behavior.
So, Mr. Marandi, with the Strait supposedly opened, what can we realistically say about Washington's goals for the war moving forward? What's the end game?
No one really knows, but we do know that Trump is bringing in lots of extra troops. And lots of extra troops mean that there's a high probability of war. And a high probability of war would mean that the ships in the Persian Gulf will be destroyed, the infrastructure, oil and gas infrastructure will be destroyed, and we are entering the hot season. If critical infrastructure in Iran is targeted, Iran will have to retaliate against those regimes that are partners in this crime. And in the summer heat of the Persian Gulf, that would mean that everyone will have to leave, and these countries, these small regimes will collapse. Of course, Iran will also target the Israeli regime. Everything depends on Trump. But Trump is, in the eyes of many, a psychopath, unstable, and therefore predicting what he will do tomorrow is not something that I pretend I have any expertise on. All I can say is that whatever he writes, you shouldn't take very seriously, and you should wait for him to say the exact opposite in the not-so-distant future.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for such an insightful discussion. We just heard from Syed Mohammad Marandi, University